We spend so much of our lives clinging to control. We try to master every outcome, shape every detail, and hold tightly to a sense of certainty that often slips through our fingers. Control gives us the illusion of safety, the belief that if we manage enough, predict enough, and force enough, life will unfold as we demand. Yet, beneath this illusion, there is a hidden truth. Control does not bring life, it suffocates it. The soul longs not for the prison of certainty, but for the freedom of becoming. Life itself is not a rigid script, but a flowing river, carrying us to places unknown, to experiences unplanned, to transformations unexpected. When we grip the river with our hands, we feel nothing but resistance. But when we release, when we allow ourselves to be carried, only then do we discover what it means to live. Letting go is not weakness, it is trust. It is the trust that the unseen parts of ourselves, the depths of the unconscious, the wisdom of the heart, the ancient truths within no more than the narrow grasp of our conscious will. When we surrender, we awaken. We discover that life does not move against us, but with us. It was never our task to control life. It was always our task to listen, to learn, and to allow life to shape us. The paradox is clear. The more we try to dominate, the more we are enslaved by fear. But when we release, when we loosen our grip, when we dare to say, "I will walk with life, not against it," we enter into alignment with something far greater than ourselves. It is in surrender that creativity arises, in surrender that love blossoms, in surrender that the soul breathes. The moment you let go of control, you step into the mystery, and in that mystery, life in its full, radiant, untamed beauty truly begins. We often live under the illusion that control is the key to peace and stability. We think that if we can manage every detail, predict every outcome, and bend life into the shape we desire, we will finally feel secure. Yet this belief is one of the greatest illusions we hold. Control, in truth, does not protect us. It imprisons us. It builds walls around our existence, walls that may seem strong, but are, in fact, brittle. They block us from the flow of life, from the unpredictability that makes us grow, from the mystery that awakens the soul. When we grip life too tightly, it slips away from us, leaving only exhaustion and fear in its place. The illusion of control begins early. As children, we long for safety and predictability. We want the world to make sense, and so we create rules in our minds. If I do this, then that will happen. If I follow the right path, I will be safe. But as we grow, life begins to show us that it does not bend to our rules. Plans fall apart, people leave, unexpected storms arrive. The more we try to resist, the more we suffer. The more we attempt to trap life in our grasp, the more it reminds us that it is far too vast to be contained. What is hidden beneath the obsession with control is fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of failure, fear of loss. Fear convinces us that if we can orchestrate every movement, then perhaps we can avoid pain. Yet the irony is that the attempt to control life often brings the very pain we wish to avoid. Anxiety grows heavier, expectations turn into disappointments, and every deviation from our plans feels like betrayal. The pursuit of control creates a cycle of tension where peace can never rest. To see through this illusion, we must confront a difficult truth. Certainty is impossible. Life has never belonged to us. It moves according to its own rhythm, its own mysteries, its own unseen currents. Our attempts to dominate it are like trying to grasp water with our hands. The tighter we squeeze, the faster it escapes. Real peace does not come from holding on, but from loosening our grip. It comes from stepping into the unknown willingly, with trust that life will meet us where we are meant to be met. When we stop clinging to the illusion of control, something remarkable happens. We begin to see life as it truly is: alive, dynamic, unpredictable, and full of possibilities beyond our imagination. The boundaries we built dissolve, and suddenly there is space for growth. Opportunities appear where we once saw obstacles. Relationships deepen when we no longer demand they meet our rigid expectations. We discover parts of ourselves that had been buried beneath the weight of control. Freedom rises not when everything is certain, but when we accept uncertainty as a companion rather than an enemy. This shift is not easy. The ego resists surrender, for it thrives on the illusion of being in command. It whispers that if we let go, chaos will swallow us, but this is a deception. Chaos only comes when we deny life's flow. True order, a deeper harmony, reveals itself when we release our grip. It is a different kind of order, one not built by force, but by trust. Trust that there is wisdom within us and around us greater than our limited understanding. Trust that the unconscious holds truths our conscious mind cannot grasp. Trust that the unknown is not always danger, but often transformation. The illusion of control also blocks us from love. Love cannot thrive where control dominates, for love demands openness and vulnerability. When we try to control another person, we suffocate the very connection we seek. When we try to control ourselves too rigidly, we cut off the natural flow of feeling, creativity, and joy. Letting go allows love to breathe, to expand, to grow in ways we could never design. It invites authenticity, for only in surrender can we show up as we truly are, without masks and without force. What begins as surrender to life eventually becomes surrender to ourselves. We realize that the struggle was never against life, but against the parts of ourselves we refused to trust. We tried to control because we did not believe we could handle the unknown. We gripped tightly because we feared we were not strong enough to endure uncertainty. But as we release, we discover a strength we never knew was there. We learn that the soul is not fragile. It is resilient, vast, and deeply wise. The illusion of control is shattered when we recognize that we were never meant to be masters of life, but participants in it. We are not here to force the river to flow in a straight line. We are here to learn how to swim with its currents. The river does not rob us of choice, but it reminds us that choice is not about domination. It is about response. We cannot choose the storms that come, but we can choose how to meet them. We cannot choose every twist in the path, but we can choose to walk with courage and openness. To release control is not to abandon responsibility. It does not mean we drift aimlessly, careless of direction. It means we take responsibility in a deeper way, by responding with presence, by aligning with life's movement, by listening to the inner voice that whispers where our rigid plans once shouted. It is not passivity, but participation. It is a dance rather than a battle. And so, life truly begins the moment we let go of the illusion of control. It begins when we stop demanding that the world bend to us, and instead allow ourselves to bend with the world. It begins when we embrace the unknown, when we trust the wisdom within, when we surrender not as victims, but as participants in something greater than ourselves. In that letting go, we do not lose, we finally gain. We gain freedom, peace, creativity, love, and the simple, profound joy of being alive. Life, in its essence, is like a river. It is ever moving, ever flowing, never stagnant, and never entirely predictable. Yet so many of us treat life as if it were a still pond, something we could control, contain, and manage. We build plans, we draw maps, we outline goals, and we convince ourselves that the river will flow exactly where we want it to. But no matter how carefully we prepare, the river has its own direction. It curves, it bends, it rushes, it calms, and it carries us to places we did not anticipate. The real tragedy is not that the river refuses to follow our map, but that we exhaust ourselves trying to resist its natural course. True living begins not when we fight the current, but when we surrender to it, when we allow ourselves to be carried rather than trying to control. When we resist the river, we feel the strain. Every wave feels like opposition, every unexpected turn feels like betrayal, and every storm seems like a punishment. But the river is not against us, it simply is. It follows its nature. To imagine that we can bend it entirely to our will is to misunderstand the very essence of life. The more we resist, the more we are pulled under. The more we fight, the less energy we have to actually move forward. Yet when we surrender, when we lean back into the current, something remarkable happens. The river begins to carry us. It does not rob us of choice, it simply relieves us of the burden of control. We find ourselves flowing more smoothly, seeing more clearly, and reaching places we could never have reached on our own. The river is a teacher. It teaches patience when the current slows, and it teaches courage when the waters surge. It teaches humility when storms arise and gratitude when the sun reflects upon its surface. The river shows us that life is not linear. It does not move in straight lines, nor does it conform to our expectations. It meanders, and in its meandering, it reveals beauty that a rigid path could never provide. The bends in the river may frustrate us at first, but often it is around those bends that we discover the hidden landscapes of the soul. To live as though life were a river means to embrace unpredictability. It means to accept that there will be stretches of calm and stretches of chaos, and that both are necessary. Calm waters give us rest and reflection. Rapid waters give us growth and transformation. The balance of both shapes who we are. If we demanded only calm, we would never learn strength. If we demanded only rapids, we would never learn peace. Life, like the river, gives us both, and it is in surrendering to this rhythm that we find harmony. When we let go and allow ourselves to be carried, we begin to experience life differently. Worry loses its grip because we no longer believe we must dictate every detail of the journey. Fear begins to dissolve because we recognize that uncertainty is not an enemy but a companion. Even pain transforms, for instead of seeing it as a punishment, we see it as a natural part of the current, something that passes through us and shapes us as it moves along. The river carries not only joy but sorrow, not only light but shadow. To resist either is to resist the fullness of life itself. This surrender to the river is not passivity, it is a deeper form of engagement. When you float with the current, you are not absent, you are present in a fuller way. You feel the water against your skin, you hear the rush of the flow, you sense the direction it pulls you. You are alive to every moment rather than preoccupied with controlling what comes next. Life, in the same way, becomes more vibrant when we surrender. Instead of obsessing over outcomes, we start to notice the small wonders along the way. Instead of clinging to rigid plans, we become open to opportunities that arise unplanned. So much of our suffering comes from demanding that life follow a straight line. We say to ourselves, by this age I must achieve this, by this time I must arrive there, by this path I must travel. Yet life rarely obeys such commands. Careers shift, relationships change, dreams evolve, and unexpected challenges alter our course. At first, this feels like failure. We feel as though the river betrayed us, but in truth, it is guiding us toward a wider ocean we could not see from where we stood. The bends and curves are not detours, they are the way itself. Letting the river carry us also means trusting in a wisdom greater than our own. Beneath the surface of life, there are forces at work we cannot see, patterns we cannot yet understand. Just as the river has carved valleys and nourished lands long before we arrived, life carries a deeper intelligence that moves us toward wholeness. Our conscious mind, as sharp as it may be, is limited. It sees only fragments. The deeper currents, however, hold the full picture. To surrender to them is to trust that we are being led, even when we cannot see where. And so, life begins when we release our grasp on the illusion of control and step into the flow. It is in the surrender that we find strength, for we no longer waste energy on resistance. It is in the surrender that we find clarity, for we are no longer clouded by rigid expectations. It is in the surrender that we find joy, for we are free to experience the journey rather than obsess over the destination. The river does not demand perfection. It only asks that we trust. The moment you stop fighting, the moment you let the river carry you, life unfolds in ways you never imagined. You arrive at shores you did not plan, but that nourish you more deeply than your plans ever could. You meet people you did not expect, but who shape your soul in lasting ways. You discover within yourself a courage, a wisdom, and a resilience that would have remained hidden had you stayed rigidly on the shore. The river is calling, as life always is. It is asking you to release, to surrender, to allow, to stop demanding that it move according to your will, and to start moving with it. And in that moment, when you trust the current, when you flow instead of resist, you will know what it means to truly live. For life does not begin in control. It begins in surrender, in the letting go, in the willingness to be carried by the river to the vastness of the unknown. There exists within us a deeper wisdom, a knowing that extends far beyond the reach of our conscious thoughts. It is hidden in the depths of our being, in the silent places of the mind and soul, and it waits patiently for us to listen. Yet too often we do not trust it. Instead, we cling to control, to rigid plans, to the false security of logic alone. We convince ourselves that if we can think enough, calculate enough, and prepare enough, we will master life. But what if life is not meant to be mastered? What if the path to wholeness comes not through domination, but through trust? Trust in that unseen depth. Trust in the wisdom that moves beneath the surface of our awareness. The conscious mind, as sharp and capable as it may seem, is only a small fragment of who we are. It is like the tip of an iceberg, visible above the water, while the vastness of the self lies hidden below. To live only from the surface is to live narrowly, confined to what we can measure and predict. But to live fully, we must learn to open ourselves to what lies beneath. This requires trust, for we cannot control what we cannot see. It is only in surrender that we discover the power and guidance of the unconscious, that deeper well of wisdom within. Trusting the unseen parts of ourselves does not mean abandoning reason. It means recognizing that reason alone cannot carry us through the mysteries of life. There are times when logic fails, when no amount of planning can prepare us for what comes. In those moments, it is intuition, dreams, symbols, and inner stirrings that guide us. These are the voices of the depths, the subtle signals that speak when the surface falls silent. To ignore them is to cut ourselves off from our wholeness. To trust them is to step into a life richer, more authentic, more aligned with who we truly are. The unconscious speaks in many ways. It reveals itself in images that arise from nowhere, in feelings we cannot explain, in synchronicities that seem too precise to be random. When we trust these messages, we allow ourselves to be guided by something larger than our limited perspective. We discover that within us there is a compass, one not bound by logic, but attuned to the deeper truths of existence. This compass does not always lead us along the straight path we desire, but it leads us where we are meant to go. Yet trusting the depths requires courage. It asks us to release control, to step into the unknown, to accept that we cannot always see the full picture. It requires us to face the parts of ourselves we have avoided, the shadow, the fears, the repressed desires, because they too hold wisdom. Beneath the discomfort lies truth, and beneath truth lies transformation. To trust the unconscious is to allow even our hidden parts to have a voice, to listen with openness rather than judgment, to integrate rather than deny. When we begin to live from this deeper trust, life changes. Decisions no longer feel like battles between right and wrong, but invitations to listen inwardly. Relationships deepen because we stop forcing them into rigid molds and instead allow them to unfold with authenticity. Creativity blossoms because we no longer stifle the imagination that rises from the unconscious, but give it freedom to express itself. Even struggles take on new meaning, for we begin to see them not as obstacles to control, but as messages, as lessons emerging from within us to guide us toward growth. It is easy to cling to control because the unseen feels uncertain. But the truth is that control itself is the greatest uncertainty, for no matter how much we plan, life refuses to conform. Trusting the unconscious may feel like risk, yet it is in fact the most natural way of being. The depths within us are not foreign, they are part of who we are. To trust them is not to leap into chaos, but to return to our own wholeness. The unconscious is not an enemy to be feared, it is a partner waiting to be embraced. This trust also extends beyond ourselves, for the wisdom within us is connected to the wisdom of life itself. Just as the unconscious holds patterns, symbols, and archetypes shared by all humanity, so too life carries currents that guide us toward meaning. When we trust the unseen within, we align with the unseen without. We begin to recognize that the same intelligence moving through our dreams is also moving through the world around us. Life, then, becomes not random, but meaningful, a dialogue between the self and the whole. The moment we let go of control and trust the depths, we enter into alignment. We stop forcing our lives into rigid shapes and instead discover the shape that was already waiting for us. We realize that the journey is not about creating ourselves from nothing, but about uncovering who we already are beneath the noise of control. This uncovering does not happen all at once. It happens slowly, gently, as we learn to listen, as we practice surrender, as we walk into the unknown with faith that we are being guided. To live in this way is to embrace mystery. It is to say yes to life, even when we do not understand it fully. It is to accept that we will not always know why things happen, but to trust that meaning is woven through it all. It is to recognize that the soul is vast, that it carries wisdom older than our conscious minds, and that by surrendering to it, we discover freedom. And so, when we release the need to control and trust in the deeper parts of ourselves, life begins in a new way. It begins with openness, with courage, with authenticity. It begins with a deeper relationship to ourselves and to the world. It begins with the discovery that we were never alone in our journey, for within us lies a guide, a wisdom, a source that was waiting all along. The moment you let go and trust the unseen depths, you do not fall into emptiness. You fall into life itself, full and radiant, waiting to carry you toward your wholeness. Freedom is a word often misunderstood. Many people imagine freedom as the ability to control everything around them, to bend circumstances to their will, to live in a world where nothing unexpected ever happens. But that is not freedom, that is bondage disguised as strength. Real freedom comes not from grasping tighter, but from letting go. It comes from the quiet strength of surrender, from the courage to release what we cannot control, and from the recognition that life was never meant to be dominated, but embraced. When we surrender, we do not lose power, we gain it. We step into a space where fear loosens its hold, where possibility expands, and where the soul can finally breathe. Control is rooted in fear. We try to control because we are afraid of loss, afraid of uncertainty, afraid of failure. We cling to plans, relationships, and expectations in hopes that they will shield us from pain. But fear is a chain, and the more we hold on, the tighter it binds us. We live in constant tension, always waiting for the moment when life will deviate from our script. That is not freedom, it is captivity, and it is only when we surrender that the chains begin to break. Surrender does not mean passivity or resignation. It does not mean giving up on life or drifting aimlessly. It means releasing the illusion that we can control everything and instead choosing to walk with life rather than against it. It is an act of trust, a decision to say, I will not let fear rule me. Surrender is a paradox. It looks like yielding, yet it is the greatest strength we can ever know. For it takes more courage to release than to cling, more strength to trust than to dominate. In surrender, fear begins to dissolve. Fear feeds on resistance. It thrives when we demand certainty, when we clutch desperately to the known. But when we release control, fear loses its fuel. Suddenly, we are no longer trapped by the need to predict every outcome. We stop fighting battles that cannot be won. We stop demanding life to be something it is not. And in that release, space opens, space for peace, for acceptance, for joy. The very act of surrender creates room for freedom to enter. Consider the weight of carrying a heavy stone everywhere you go. At first, you believe it protects you, that without it, you will be vulnerable. But over time, the weight exhausts you. Your steps grow slower, your spirit weary. Surrender is the moment you set down the stone and realize you never needed it. The freedom you longed for was not in the stone, but in the release of it. This is what happens when we let go of control. We find ourselves lighter, freer, more alive. This freedom is not the absence of challenge, but the presence of courage. Surrender allows us to face life's difficulties without being crushed by them. When we no longer demand that life follow our plan, we are able to adapt, to grow, to transform. Obstacles cease to be enemies and become teachers. Setbacks cease to be failures and become redirections. Every twist and turn in the path becomes part of a larger unfolding, and because we are no longer fighting it, we are able to walk it with strength and grace. True freedom is also the freedom to be ourselves. Control often masks itself in perfectionism, in the belief that we must present ourselves in a certain way to be loved or accepted. We try to control how others see us, how they respond, how they feel. But in doing so, we betray our own authenticity. We wear masks, we hide truths, we silence parts of ourselves for the sake of approval. Surrender breaks this cycle. When we release the need to control perception, we begin to live honestly. We allow ourselves to be vulnerable, to be imperfect, to be real. And in that honesty, love can finally grow. Love for ourselves and love from others. Creativity, too, is born from surrender. When we cling to control, we stifle the flow of inspiration. We demand certainty, and creativity cannot exist in certainty. It exists in openness, in willingness, in the courage to step into the unknown. The artist does not control every brushstroke before it touches the canvas. The poet does not map out every word before it arrives. They surrender to the process, to the mystery of creation. In the same way, Life itself becomes art when we surrender. We begin to see each day not as a rigid plan, but as a canvas waiting for color, shape, and surprise. To surrender is also to trust in something greater than ourselves. Whether we call it life, the universe, the soul, or the divine, there is a current moving through existence that we cannot command. When we stop fighting that current, we discover it is not against us. It carries us, teaches us, shapes us. We realize that surrender is not falling into emptiness. It is falling into meaning. It is an alignment with the deeper rhythm of life, a rhythm that has always been there, waiting for us to stop resisting. Freedom through surrender is a kind of rebirth. The moment we release control, we find ourselves breathing more deeply. We notice beauty we once overlooked because our eyes were fixed on rigid expectations. We experience joy in the present because we are no longer obsessed with the future. We feel connected to others because we stop trying to manipulate them and instead allow them to simply be. The world opens up, not because it has changed, but because we have. And so the paradox remains. Freedom comes not from control, but from surrender. Control is the cage, surrender is the key. Control is the illusion, surrender is the truth. The courage to let go is the path to liberation. It is the moment when fear gives way to trust, when rigidity softens into openness, when the soul, long stifled, spreads its wings and remembers how to fly. Life begins when we no longer seek to master it, but to walk with it. It begins when we stop forcing and start trusting. It begins when we see that surrender is not defeat, but the highest expression of strength. For the one who surrenders is not weak, but free. And in that freedom, life, in all its fullness and beauty, finally begins. Life is not an enemy to be fought, nor a puzzle to be forced into shape. It has always moved with us, even when we thought it was moving against us. The difficulty lies not in life itself, but in our resistance to it. When we cling to control, we separate ourselves from the natural rhythm of existence. We create division where there should be harmony. Yet the moment we surrender, the moment we loosen our grip, we begin to see that life is not hostile. It has never been against us. It has always carried a deeper purpose, one that becomes visible only when we allow ourselves to align with it. Alignment with life is not about giving up our choices or drifting without direction. It is about listening. It is about attuning ourselves to the subtle movement of the world around us, to the whispers of the unconscious within us, to the quiet invitations that call us forward. Too often, we are so consumed with our own demands and expectations that we miss the signals life is sending. We demand certainty, we demand perfection, we demand outcomes that conform to our plans. But life is wiser than our demands. It withholds what would harm us, it redirects us when we are lost, it breaks down illusions we cling to so that we may discover truth. When we are in resistance, every shift feels like betrayal. We ask, why is this happening to me? As if life were punishing us. But when we are in alignment, our question changes. We begin to ask, what is this teaching me? Where is this leading me? How am I being shaped through this? The same event, the same circumstance, can feel entirely different depending on whether we resist it or flow with it. The moment we choose alignment, suffering begins to transform into meaning. Alignment does not remove difficulty. The storms still come, the losses still arrive, the path still twists and turns, but alignment changes the way we move through them. Instead of fighting against the storm, we learn how to stand in it. Instead of fearing loss, we begin to see what it opens within us. Instead of resenting the twists, we learn to trust that they are carrying us toward a destination we could not yet imagine. In alignment, life is not something we endure. It becomes something we participate in fully. To align with life, we must quiet the constant noise of control. Our minds are always racing, trying to predict, to calculate, to demand. But alignment requires listening, and listening requires silence. It asks us to pause, to breathe, to look inward. It is in stillness that we sense the deeper movement, the current beneath the surface. It is in stillness that we hear the voice of intuition, that inner knowing that cannot be explained but only trusted. And when we begin to trust it, we realize it was guiding us all along. Consider the way a musician plays in an orchestra. If the musician insists on playing their own rhythm, separate from the rest, the harmony is broken. But if they listen, if they align with the larger composition, their instrument adds to a beauty far greater than any solo performance. Life is like this. Our task is not to force our own narrow melody, but to join the symphony that is already unfolding. Alignment allows us to discover our true place in the greater whole. When we resist alignment, we live in constant conflict with ourselves. We feel torn between what we think we should be and what we actually are, between the path we demand and the path that calls us. This inner division is the root of much of our suffering. But when we align, when we stop resisting the truth of who we are and the truth of the life we are given, we experience integration. We begin to feel whole because we are no longer fighting against ourselves. This wholeness is not perfection. It does not mean that everything is easy or that we never struggle. It means that even in struggle, we sense meaning. Even in pain, we sense purpose. We begin to trust that there is a thread running through all of it, weaving our experiences into a larger tapestry. And though we may not yet see the full design, we learn to trust that it exists. Alignment gives us peace not because it answers every question, but because it allows us to rest in the mystery. Alignment also brings us closer to others. When we are no longer trying to control everything, we stop trying to control people. We allow them to be as they are, to walk their own paths, to flow in their own rhythms. Relationships that were once strained by expectation begin to soften. We find compassion where there was judgment, understanding where there was tension. Just as we align with life, we also align with those around us, realizing that their journey, like ours, has its own unfolding. When we align with life, opportunities appear in places we never thought to look. Doors open that we did not even know existed. What seemed like coincidence begins to feel like guidance. The people we meet, the challenges we face, the dreams that stir within us, all of it begins to fit together. We realize that alignment is not something we create, but something we uncover, a rhythm that has always been there beneath the noise of control. To live in alignment is to walk with trust. It is to recognize that life is not a battle to be won, but a mystery to be entered. It is to release the illusion that we must always lead and to discover the strength in being led. It is to know that even when the way is unclear, we are being carried. Life is not moving against us. It is moving with us, shaping us, inviting us to become more fully ourselves. And so, the freedom we long for, the peace we seek, the meaning we crave, they do not come from domination. They come from alignment, from listening, from trusting, from allowing ourselves to move with life instead of against it. The moment we surrender, the moment we let go of resistance, we discover that life was never our opponent. It was always our companion, waiting patiently for us to walk with it rather than against it. It is in alignment that we find our truest path, not the path of rigid control, not the path of constant resistance, but the path of openness, of trust, of flow. To align is to live, not in fear, but in harmony. And in that harmony, in that surrender, life, real life, finally begins. The true beginning of life does not arrive when we achieve control, nor when we finally master every detail of our existence. It begins in the moment we surrender, in the instant we release the illusion that we must hold everything together. When we let go, something shifts within us, a door opens, and through that door, life in its fullest form enters. It is in surrender that love grows, in surrender that creativity awakens, in surrender that we discover authenticity. The beginning of life is not found in domination, but in the courage to release and allow. When we cling to control, we restrict the natural flow of being. We live as though life were a machine, a system to be engineered, rather than a mystery to be experienced. Every moment becomes a calculation, every decision a strategy, every step a demand. But in this constant controlling, we lose touch with the spontaneity of existence. We silence the whispers of the heart, we ignore the signals of the unconscious, and we drown out the natural rhythms that make us human. To live this way is to live half alive, always chasing a perfection that never comes. The moment we surrender, everything changes. Love, which struggles under the weight of control, suddenly expands. When we try to control others, we suffocate them, bending them to fit our expectations. But when we let go, we allow them to be themselves. In this space of acceptance, love can finally breathe. It grows not as something forced, but as something natural, free, and authentic. To love without control is to see another person as they truly are, not as we demand them to be. It is in this kind of love that we discover connection far deeper than anything control could ever achieve. Creativity, too, blossoms in surrender. Creativity does not thrive under rigid structure or suffocating rules. It thrives in openness, in spontaneity, in the willingness to step into the unknown. When we let go of control, we open ourselves to inspiration. Ideas flow not because we command them, but because we allow them. The poet surrenders to the words that rise from the depths, the painter to the colors that appear on the canvas, the musician to the notes that seem to arrive from beyond. Life itself becomes art when we surrender, for every moment becomes an opportunity to create, to express, to discover something new. Authenticity is another gift born in surrender. So long as we are clinging to control, we wear masks. We present ourselves in ways we think others expect. We hide parts of who we are. We bend ourselves to fit an image. But authenticity cannot coexist with control. It requires freedom, the freedom to reveal ourselves fully, without fear of judgment. When we surrender, when we stop trying to control how we are seen, we allow our true selves to emerge. We discover that being real, even if imperfect, is far more powerful than being polished and controlled. It is in authenticity that we experience true belonging, for only when we are real can others truly connect with us. Surrender is not a loss, it is a beginning. It is not the end of effort, but the end of struggle against what cannot be controlled. It is the beginning of peace, the beginning of trust, the beginning of alignment with life itself. When we surrender, we enter into partnership with the deeper forces of existence. We begin to recognize that life is not random, that meaning is woven through every experience, that even our struggles have purpose. We no longer see ourselves as victims of chaos, but as participants in a larger unfolding. This beginning is subtle, yet profound. It may come in a quiet moment when we finally release the weight we have been carrying. It may come in the midst of crisis, when we realize that no amount of control will save us, and we must trust something beyond ourselves. It may come in an ordinary day, when we simply decide to let go of perfection and live as we are. In whatever way it comes, it feels like breathing after holding your breath for far too long. It feels like stepping into sunlight after being trapped in shadows. It feels like life, raw and real, entering every corner of our being. The beginning of life in surrender also brings a new relationship with time. When we are caught in control, we are always in the future, chasing outcomes, fearing possibilities. We rarely inhabit the present, for the present feels like a stepping stone to something else. But in surrender, the present becomes enough. We begin to experience each moment as it is, without demanding that it be different. We notice the beauty of simple things, the warmth of a smile, the sound of the wind, the quiet joy of being alive. Time slows, and in that slowing, life deepens. Surrender also brings resilience. When we are obsessed with control, every setback feels like failure, every detour like defeat. But when we live in surrender, we see setbacks differently. We see them as part of the path, as lessons, as opportunities for transformation. We realize that life is not meant to be a straight line, and that sometimes what feels like loss is in truth a redirection towards something greater. In this way, surrender makes us strong, not with the brittle strength of control, but with the flexible strength of trust. The fullness of life does not begin when everything is certain. It begins when we accept uncertainty, when we embrace it as a companion rather than an enemy. It begins when we realize that we do not need to know every answer, we only need to take the next step with courage. In surrender, the unknown is no longer a threat, but a field of possibility. It is in stepping into that field that life unfolds in ways we never imagined. And so, the moment we let go, the moment we release our tight grip on control, is the moment life begins. It is the moment love deepens, creativity flourishes, authenticity emerges, and peace fills the spaces once crowded by fear. It is the moment we stop resisting and start living. Surrender is not the end of power. It is the discovery of true power. It is not the death of self. It is the birth of the self in its fullness. To surrender is to finally live, to step into the mystery, to embrace the river of life as it carries us forward. In that surrender, life begins, not as a plan, not as a demand, but as a radiant unfolding, vast and beautiful beyond our control.